There is a question that visits almost everyone who has ever loved a narcissist, and it usually shows up late at night, long after the relationship is over, long after the noise is gone, and the silence starts speaking louder than anything else. The question sounds small, but it carries a huge weight. Do they ever feel anything after hurting you? Do they ever sit alone with what they did? Do they ever feel guilt, regret, shame, or even one honest second of remorse? The real answer is harder than most people expect, but it is also the answer that starts to set you free. Because yes, they do feel something, often a lot, but what they feel is usually not the thing you have been hoping for. And when you finally understand the difference between what they truly experience and what you kept waiting for them to experience, something in you begins to loosen. Something in you finally gets air. Stay with me here because this matters more than you think. If you have spent hours, weeks, or even years replaying moments in your mind, trying to understand whether the person who hurt you ever felt bad for what they did, you are not weak and you are not foolish. You are a human being whose mind is still trying to finish a story that never got a real ending. The brain wants things to make sense. It wants emotional events to close properly. So when someone wounds you deeply, especially someone you trusted, your mind naturally reaches for meaning. You want to know they understood your pain. You want to know your suffering was seen. You want to know it mattered, because if it mattered to them, then maybe what happened to you was not just swallowed by silence. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was witnessed. And that search is not pathetic. It is the mind trying to repair what another person refused to repair with you. But here is the first truth, and it is not comfortable, though it is powerful. The emotional world of a person with strong narcissistic traits is not empty. It is arranged differently. Where you might feel guilt, they often feel exposed. Where you might feel sorrow for causing pain, they often feel humiliation for being seen in a bad light. Where you might feel a need to repair, they often feel anger that the situation is no longer under their control. That difference changes everything. This is not about calling them monsters. It is about seeing the pattern clearly. Their inner world is not blank. It is guarded. It is defended from top to bottom. And those defenses are so automatic, so deeply wired, that real accountability rarely gets through. When you imagine them feeling remorse, what you are often doing is placing your own heart inside their body. You are imagining what you would feel if you had done what they did. And because you are capable of empathy, what you would feel would be crushing. You would lose sleep, you would replay the damage, you would want to say sorry, you would want to repair what you broke. So, naturally, you assume they must be carrying something like that too. But they are not carrying your emotional weight. They are carrying their own, and their burden is shaped by a desperate need to protect an image of themselves that cannot bear being seen as flawed, unkind, selfish, or wrong. If this is already hitting home, keep listening, because the next part explains why their reactions always felt so close to remorse, and yet never fully real. That confusion did not happen by accident. It came from a pattern. And once you can name that pattern, you stop getting trapped inside it. The difference between true remorse and narcissistic injury is one of the most important things you will ever understand. True remorse is focused on the other person. It is the painful awareness that you caused harm to another human being, and it creates a sincere wish to repair, to listen, to understand, and to make amends. Narcissistic injury is very different. It is focused on the self. It is the painful awareness of being criticized, being exposed, being challenged, or being seen as less than perfect. And that kind of pain does not usually lead to growth. It leads to defense. It leads to excuses, blame, coldness, anger, image control, and sometimes revenge. From the outside, both can look emotional. Both can involve tears. Both can sound intense. But inside, they are worlds apart. One says, "I hurt you, and I want to understand the damage." The other says, "I hate how this makes me look, and I need to regain control." So when a narcissistic person seems upset after hurting you, stop for a moment and ask yourself what the upset is really about. Are they upset because they understand your pain? Or are they upset because they lost access to you, lost the story they were controlling, lost admiration, lost attention, or lost the role they liked playing in your life? Those are not the same thing. And learning to spot that difference can save you years of confusion. It can save you from going back. It can save you from mistaking emotional intensity for emotional honesty. This is where many survivors get pulled back in because they see visible emotion and assume it must mean inner change. But emotion alone proves nothing. Plenty of people cry over consequences. Very few cry because they finally understand the wound they caused. Another piece that confuses people is self-pity, because self-pity can sound almost exactly like regret if you're exhausted enough and hungry enough for closure. Self-pity borrows the language of remorse, but it keeps the focus on the person who caused the harm. They may say they feel terrible. They may say everything is falling apart. They may look broken, lonely, shaken, even desperate. But if you listen closely, the pain they are talking about is usually about what they lost, not what you went through. It is about their reputation, their discomfort, their loneliness, their consequences, their image, their emptiness. It is not about your wounds. It is not about your sleepless nights. It is not about the confusion, the erosion, the fear, the slow damage done to your sense of self. Self-pity is one of the most convincing copies of remorse because it wears the same clothes. It sounds emotional, it can sound soft, it can even sound deep, but it is not empathy. It is grief over losing supply, losing comfort, losing control, or losing a version of themselves they wanted to keep alive. And then there is wounded pride, which is often even stronger. Wounded pride tells them they are the injured one. In their mind, they were misunderstood, judged unfairly, abandoned, disrespected, or attacked. This is why so many survivors walk away from these relationships feeling like they somehow became the villain in a story where they were clearly harmed. The reality gets turned, the script gets flipped. The person who caused the pain begins behaving as if they were the one wounded by your response to the pain. That distortion is not always planned in some cold way. Sometimes it is automatic. Sometimes it is the mind rushing to protect a fragile center that cannot survive the full truth. But whether it is conscious or not, the effect on you is the same. It leaves you doubting your own reality. And beneath all of that, there is fear. Real fear. Narcissistic people do feel fear, and understanding this fear helps explain why they return, why they love bomb, why they offer vague apologies, and why they sometimes seem suddenly soft right when you begin pulling away. They fear exposure. They fear losing the image they carefully built. They fear losing attention, admiration, validation, and emotional reactions from the people around them. They fear being seen as ordinary. They fear losing the mirror that reflects back the version of themselves they want to believe in. And in some deep place they rarely touch directly, they may fear that if the mask ever fully drops, there may be very little underneath that feels solid to them. That fear is not the same thing as love. It is not the same thing as caring about your pain, but it can look similar if you are still hoping. That is why the return can feel so convincing. They come back with softer words, warmer tones, sudden vulnerability, promises of change, and a kind of emotional urgency that makes you wonder if maybe this time is different. But what you are often seeing is not the return of love. It is the return of fear. Fear of losing the role you played in holding together their self-image. Fear of losing access to your attention. Fear of no longer being able to control how the story ends. This is why so many of their apologies feel empty even when the mood looks serious. Something is missing. There is no real naming of the damage, no deep curiosity about how you felt, no patient effort to understand what was broken, no willingness to stay in discomfort long enough to truly face themselves. Instead, there are broad statements, quick tears, sudden self-focus, and subtle ways of spreading the blame around so they never have to carry it fully. That is not because you asked for too much. It is because true accountability demands self-confrontation, and self-confrontation is the very thing their defenses are built to avoid. Now, it is important to say this clearly. Not every person with narcissistic traits feels or behaves in exactly the same way. Human beings are complicated. Narcissism exists on a spectrum. Some people have moments of insight, especially in the right therapeutic setting, and some do change in limited ways over time. But those moments are often rarer, weaker, and less stable than survivors desperately hope. Others stay locked in denial, blame, projection, and image management for most of their lives. The point is not to label every difficult person. The point is not to become obsessed with diagnosis. The point is to stop tying your healing to the fantasy that one day they will wake up, see everything clearly, and finally become the person you needed them to be. That fantasy can keep you emotionally trapped for years. It can keep you frozen in a waiting room that has no door, and this is where the focus has to begin changing. Because if you spend all your energy trying to decode their inner world, you slowly lose contact with your own. The more attention you give to understanding them, the less attention you have left for understanding what happened to you. And that shift matters. It matters a lot. Because the most important person to understand in this story is not the one who hurt you. It is you. It is your patterns, your pain, your hope, your confusion, your tolerance, your longing, your nervous system, your unmet needs, and your slow return to yourself. If that lands somewhere deep in you, stay with me. This is where things begin to change. Because the reason this question hurts so much is not only about the relationship. It reaches further back than that. It touches older places, older silences, older hungers, and once you see that, your healing stops depending on them and starts coming home to you. The reason you keep circling the question of whether they feel anything is often not really about them at all. It is about an older part of you that learned somewhere in your life that your pain only counted if somebody else admitted it was real. Maybe your tears were dismissed when you were young. Maybe honesty was less important in your family than keeping up appearances. Maybe you were taught to be polite, quiet, flexible, forgiving, and understanding even when you were being hurt. Maybe your feelings were minimized so often that you stopped trusting them without outside confirmation. So when a narcissistic person harms you and then refuses to truly acknowledge it, something older gets activated. The wound is not just fresh, it is familiar. Suddenly, you are not only dealing with this relationship, you are dealing with every time your reality was ignored, twisted, or denied by someone who should have seen you and did not. That is why the obsession feels so strong. That is why it keeps pulling you back. It is not just about getting an apology from them. It is about a deeper longing to finally have your pain witnessed by someone who caused it. And here is the healing move. It is simple, but it is not easy. You begin learning to validate your own pain without needing them to validate it first. Read that again in your mind if you need to. Because this changes everything. You can become the witness you were waiting for. You can say to yourself, what happened to me was real. What I felt was real, the confusion was real, the wound was real, and I do not need their confession to prove it. That is a quiet kind of power, but it is life-changing. It begins to untangle the knot. It begins to stop the chase. It begins to break the spell. And if you have been waiting for a sign that it is finally time to stop asking them to confirm your reality, this may be it. This may be the moment. When you start validating your own pain, the trauma bond begins to weaken. And this is something people misunderstand all the time. Trauma bonds are not maintained by love alone. They are maintained by unresolved emotional cycles, by confusion, by craving, by inconsistency, by the high and low pattern that keeps your nervous system hooked on trying to predict an unpredictable person. The bond stays alive because some part of you is still waiting for the ending to change, still waiting for them to understand, still waiting for the honest apology, still waiting for the soft, truthful version of them that appeared just enough to keep you invested, still waiting for the promise to become real. But as long as you are waiting, you are still tied to them. The bond does not break because they suddenly transform. Most of the time, they do not. The bond breaks when you stop waiting. It breaks when you accept that the clarity you needed may never come from their mouth. It breaks when you stop trying to collect emotional evidence from someone whose whole system is organized around avoiding real self-exposure. And that is also the moment boundaries become possible in a deeper way. Not angry walls, not dramatic speeches, not last-minute threats you do not plan to keep. Real boundaries, quiet boundaries. Boundaries built from self-respect and reality. A boundary is not punishment. It is not cruelty. It is not revenge. It is simply what becomes possible when you finally stop pretending. You stop pretending they do not know what they are doing. You stop pretending your pain will eventually move them in the way your pain would move you. You stop pretending that hope is the same thing as evidence. And from that clarity, you begin choosing what you will and will not allow into your life. That is not bitterness. That is wisdom earned the hard way. One of the deepest injuries in a relationship like this is the damage done to your own perception. Over time, you were likely told you were too sensitive, too emotional, too reactive, too suspicious, too needy, too much, or somehow never enough. Maybe you were told events did not happen the way you remember. Maybe your instincts were mocked. Maybe your questions were turned back on you until you felt ashamed for even asking them. Slowly, almost without noticing, you began stepping away from your own inner signals. You stopped trusting what you saw. You stopped trusting what you felt. You stopped trusting the quiet voice in you that kept saying something is not right here. That erosion is one of the cruelest parts of this kind of dynamic because it does not only hurt in the moment, it follows you after the relationship ends. It leaves you second-guessing yourself in future relationships, future conflicts, future choices. Healing means rebuilding that bridge back to your own perception. It means learning slowly and patiently to believe yourself again, to trust the discomfort you felt, to trust the confusion that kept repeating, to trust the ache in your body that always seemed to know before your mind was ready to admit it. This is not dramatic work. It is quiet work, repetition work, daily work, but it is powerful, and it cannot happen fully while you are still measuring your reality against theirs. As long as their version of events remains the ruler in your hand, you will keep shrinking your truth to fit inside their story. Recovery begins when you put that ruler down. It begins when you stop asking, "But did they mean it?" and start asking, "What did it do to me?" That question opens a door. That question brings you back to yourself. And once you truly begin walking through that door, the need to decode them starts losing its grip. At some point, you also have to release the fantasy of closure. Not because closure is meaningless, but because the version you were taught to wait for is often the version you will never get from someone with deeply rooted narcissistic patterns. Many people imagine closure as a final conversation where everything is named honestly, where the truth is admitted, where the damage is acknowledged, where the apology finally matches the wound, and where you leave feeling lighter because the missing piece was finally handed to you. It is a beautiful idea, but with people like this, it often remains an idea. The longer you wait for that moment, the longer you stay emotionally tied to a relationship that already took too much from you. Real closure is usually quieter than that. It is built, not given. It grows slowly through understanding, grief, distance, repetition, and the steady return of your own attention back into your own life. Real closure is not the moment they finally say the perfect words. Real closure is the moment you realize you no longer need them to. That is a different kind of freedom, a stronger one. And yes, there will still be days when old questions come back. Days when a memory rises without warning and you wonder again if they ever think about you, if they ever feel the damage they caused, if they ever sit alone with the truth. Those moments do not mean you are failing. They mean you are healing in waves, the way the body heals from anything deep. Be gentle with yourself there. Wondering is not the same as returning. Missing clarity is not the same as wanting the pain back. Thinking about them for a moment does not erase your progress. It simply means your nervous system is still unwinding something that once held it captive. Let the question pass through. Do not build a home inside it. You do not need every answer to move forward. You only need enough truth to stop abandoning yourself. And then, if you keep going, something subtle starts happening. Not all at once, not with fireworks, but slowly, steadily, almost quietly enough to miss if you are not paying attention. You think about them less. You notice whole hours pass without their voice echoing in your head. Then, whole days. The space they once occupied starts filling with your own life again. Your laughter comes back in small pieces. Your interests return. Music sounds like music again instead of memory. Food tastes like food again instead of stress. You stop scanning every conversation for hidden danger. You stop bracing for the next emotional shift. Your body begins to understand that it is no longer living in constant impact. And this is what healing often looks like in real life. Not one grand breakthrough, not one perfect morning where everything is suddenly over. It looks like a slow, steady return to yourself. It looks like sleeping a little deeper, breathing a little easier, trusting your thoughts a little more. It looks like curiosity replacing obsession. It looks like peace feeling less strange. If this part speaks to you, stay with it, because this is the future that becomes possible when you stop treating their insight as the key to your freedom. Your life starts coming back, your energy starts coming back, your identity starts coming back. And with that return comes a new truth, one that may feel almost unbelievable after everything you have been through. You were never too much. You were never impossible to love. You were never the problem they trained you to think you were. You were responding to harm. You were trying to make sense of confusion. You were trying to save something that kept asking you to lose yourself in order to keep it. That is not weakness. That is what happens when someone withholds stability and then blames you for shaking. So carry this with you. The person who hurt you may feel many things after causing pain, but most of what they feel will not be the thing you waited for. Their silence does not erase your reality. Their refusal to admit what they did does not make the damage less real. Their lack of remorse is not proof that you imagined it. And their inability to truly see you is not a measure of your worth, your depth, or your visibility. You are not invisible. You are not too sensitive. You are not difficult for needing honesty, kindness, consistency, and care. You are someone who loved deeply, someone who tried sincerely, someone who stayed longer than most people understand because your heart kept searching for a version of the story that would finally make sense. But now something new is possible. Now you can stop waiting at the door of a house that was never built to shelter you. Now you can stop asking for water from a place that kept handing you mirages. Now you can choose yourself without needing permission, without needing closure from the one who caused the wound, without needing the final confession you once thought you could not live without, because your freedom was never theirs to hand back. It was always yours to reclaim, quietly, firmly, completely. And the moment you stop waiting for their admission, their awakening, their perfect apology, is the moment your healing truly begins. Not because everything stops hurting at once, but because your life is no longer organized around someone else's inability to face themselves. That is the shift, that is the release, that is the beginning of peace. And if this found you at the right time, let it stay with you. Let it sink deeper than the question that haunted you. Let it remind you that your healing does not begin when they understand your pain. It begins when you stop needing them to.